Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the King Academy School Committee, we are excited to welcome world-renowned author Jonathan Eig, Chief Equity, Strategy, and Engagement Officer Dr. Cook, the King Academy School Committee guests and friends. We are honored to host Mr. Eig for today's book chat of his new book, King A Life.
We and countless other students have the pleasure of walking the halls of Dr. King's namesake, where we understand that intelligence plus character is the goal of true education. We are grateful to Mr. Eig and the rest of the Chicago Public Schools team that made this event possible today. Now, let's welcome Principal Thurman to the stage.
Thank you all for clapping, even though I'm already on the stage. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's good to see you all. I have the pleasure of introducing Chief Cook. Fatima Cook is the Chief of Equity, Engagement, and Strategy for Chicago Public Schools. Prior to this position, Cook served as the Deputy Chief of Schools for Network 5 and as Principal and Assistant Principal of Sumner Math and Science Community Academy in Chicago's North Lawndale community. Fatima is an experienced educational leader and team player with a proven track record of collaborating with school communities and increasing student achievement. Not only is she a product of Chicago Public Schools, but I believe she's also a parent of students in Chicago Public Schools. King Academy, please help me welcome Chief Fatima Cook.
Good morning. I think you guys can do better than that. Good morning. That's what it feels like to be a school leader. I miss it. So, good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Fatima Cook, and I am the Chief Equity Engagement and Strategy Officer for Chicago Public Schools. As a former teacher and principal, so thrilled this morning to be here in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Academy of Social Justice. Can I get a round of applause? It is especially meaningful to be here at your school after such an impactful leader and in a space where you are our future leaders. Part of my job is to ensure that cultural identities are affirmed when kids are in school. And let's give Principal Thurman and AP Little for making that happen here at this school. Round of applause. I want to thank AP Little and Principal Thurman and their entire team for their commitment in teaching students about influential Black figures, both during Black History Month, but through the entire year. These efforts will pay off for years to come, as they will help each and every one of you know that everything that you need to be successful is already inside of you, and that your race, zip code, or lived experience should not determine your ability to reach your goals. And today, your school has an awesome opportunity to learn about the namesake by welcoming Jonathan Eig for a presentation and discussion. Mr. Eig has written a biography, Dr. King, that will be an excellent resource for your library and libraries across CPS. Want to close with a couple of remarks to you. So I'm speaking to all of you that are sitting in the seats today. I want to remind you that if there is a Black historical figure that you want to learn more about, tap on your teacher or an adult in the building and have them help you research that individual. Because you too may be sitting in this seat one day, writing a biography about another influential Black figure, or writing an autobiography about something influential that you have done. And so thank you again for allowing me to join you this morning. I'm going to pass it over to AP Little. Round of applause, folks. Great day, King Academy. I am honored to introduce the King Academy Choir. Today we'll enjoy a performance conducted by Mr. Bowles and Ms. Tisdale. This is Mr. Bowles' second year in partnership with us, coming from United Voices Chicago, formerly known as the Chicago Children's Choir. Today we will be hearing People Get Ready, and Ms. Tisdale, our Director of Performing Arts, will lead us in Trouble in My Way. Let's give them a power clap on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Good morning, King Academy. We decided we would start today out with a call and response entitled Trouble in Our Way. Ready? Trouble in my way. Trouble in my way. I gotta cry sometimes. I gotta cry sometimes. We all in so much trouble. Trouble in my way. I gotta cry sometimes. I gotta cry sometimes. I lay awake at night. I lay awake at night. But that's alright. That's alright. My Jesus. Jesus, He will fix it. My Jesus. Jesus, He will fix it. My Jesus. Jesus, He will fix it. After a while. After a while. Trouble in my way. Trouble in my way. I gotta cry sometimes. We all in so much trouble. Trouble in my way. I gotta cry sometimes. I lay awake at night. That's alright. Jesus, He will fix it. 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 After a while. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Evans, whenever you're ready.
People get ready, let the train coming. Don't be no panic, let's get on board. Are you feeling ready to hear the people coming? Don't
All right, everyone, let's give the King Academy Choir another round of applause. We are so very proud of our choir and their hard work. I want to thank Mr. Bowles and Ms. Tisdale for their work with the choir. I also want to thank the team for ensuring that the building and the auditorium, the gymnatorium was prepared for this event. We are about to start our conversation with Mr. Eig, and our students Zanaya and Natwan will be reading his bio, and then we will go into the interview questions. After that, we will take some questions from our students in the audience. Some of you already jotted down some questions when you read the excerpt, and so we are going to have some of our students' questions featured, and we're just going to have a great time today. Are you all ready? Yeah. I heard someone say no, and it was loud, so we'll try it again. Are you all ready? Yeah. Oh, this side is ready. I don't think this side is ready. Let's try one last time. Are we ready? Yeah! All right. I'm going to give the mic over to Mr. Eig, and Zanaya and Natwan will read the bio.
Jonathan Eig is an author of 10 books, including 3 New York Times bestsellers. Eig's new book, King Alive, shares newly uncovered information on the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. Eig is also the author of best-selling biography, Ali Alive, Opening Day, the story of Jackie Robinson's first season, and multiple children's books.
Jonathan began his writing career at age 16 working for his hometown newspaper. The Rockland County New York Journal News, studied journalism at Northwestern University, and went on to work as a reporter for the New Orleans Times, the Dallas Morning News, Chicago Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. Eig lives in Chicago with his wife and children, who are students in Chicago public schools. Everyone, let's give author Jonathan Eig a power clap on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Testing. So, Mr. Eig, I have a question to ask you. What gave you the courage to write this book?
Wow, that's a great question. Thank you so much. First of all, let me say thank you for having me here today at King Academy. It's really inspiring to see Dr. King's words all over the school, and to see the way you people are being taught the lessons of his life. And courage is a good choice of word in that question, because to take on a story as big as this, to take the responsibility to tell Dr. King's story, is humbling. And I was scared to do it. I felt like, who am I? I never met the man. I'm not an expert. How do I get the courage to take on life story, not just of anyone, but of somebody as important as Dr. King? And I began really cautiously by asking the people closest to Dr. King if they would help me, because I felt like I couldn't do it without help. And if I were going to take this book took me 6 years to write. And for you guys, that's especially a long time. Even for me, that's a long time. You know, I'm 58, so I started when I was 52. I started when my daughter was in 2nd grade, and now she's in 8th grade. So to get that courage that I needed, I started asking some of Dr. King's friends, will you help me? So people who knew Dr. King, we think of him as sometimes, you know, this figure from history, like Thomas Jefferson or Abraham Lincoln, right? But did you know that Dr. King's older sister is still alive? Did you know that he could still be alive today? He would be 94, I think. 94. So I went out and found some of Dr. King's friends, people who knew him from school when they were kids. I went out and found people who knew him from the marches in Selma and Montgomery, and I said, will you help me? if I want to try to write a book about Dr. King, and they said, yes, we would love to see you do that, and their help gave me the courage to undertake this very long project. So thank you, that's a great question.
Thank you, Mr. Eig.
So my question is, why do you think King's approach was the most aggressive approach that the country has ever seen?
That's also a really good question. You know, a lot of people think of Dr. King today as being more conservative or more passive than someone like Malcolm X. And, you know, I even saw a sign on one of your doors that said, dream like King, protest like Malcolm. And I don't think that's fair. I think Dr. King was in many ways more aggressive and more radical than Malcolm X. And we don't give him credit enough for it, because he had the courage not only to say that he's going to march peacefully and that he's going to insist on nonviolence, but he also had the courage to put his life on the line and to not just protest, but to demand specific things, to demand a Voting Rights Act, to demand a Civil Rights Act that would end segregation. He was in many ways, I think, our greatest and most fearless radical leader. But he had the courage to do that because he believed in himself from an early age. You know, he was the son of a preacher, the grandson of a preacher. He saw his parents and his grandparents getting up and speaking in public about what they believed and pushing people to think about what this country could do differently. So somehow, even as a young man, he had the confidence to demand that this country try to do better. And I think that fearlessness is really what made him so powerful, that he was willing to risk everything to stand up, not just for what he believed, but for what he thought the country really should value. So that really moved me.
Thank you.
It was interesting to me that you have a different perspective on him than other people who think that he was somewhat of a saint, like he never did any wrong, but you made it like a point to let people know he was just a man, like he was regular. Not regular, but
No, he was a regular man. He bit his fingernails when he was nervous, right? He when he watched game shows on TV, he would yell on TV, like he knew the answer. You know, he was just like us in many ways. He was more courageous than most of us in many ways, but I felt like it's important, and this, I'd love to talk to you about this, and we could talk about it all day. When we think of Dr. King, we think of the school named after him. We've seen the monument in Washington, D.C. We think of him as almost like a saint, like you said. And is it okay for our saints to be flawed? Is it okay that he chewed his fingernails? Is it okay that he wasn't perfect all the time? He sometimes smoked cigarettes, and he didn't like to be seen. His children would hide them and flush them down the toilet because they didn't want him smoking cigarettes, but he couldn't help it. He wasn't perfect. And I think it's okay that we accept our heroes and don't expect them to be perfect. Because I'm not perfect. I'm guessing probably even your principal isn't quite perfect. She's close. And we don't need our heroes to be perfect. We just need them to try their hardest to do what's right. And I think when we see someone like Dr. King as human, we can relate to him better. And we can maybe follow in his footsteps and try to do great things ourselves because we know we don't have to be perfect to do great things. So I think that's really important when you write about our heroes. Even though it's uncomfortable sometimes, because we don't want to see them as flawed. It's hard to think about the things they do wrong. But he wrestled with it too, and I think we can handle it. I think he was great enough that we can handle a few of his flaws and still see him as great, maybe even greater.
But that's real important that you put that in here, because it can give people like motivation to be like, I can do anything, because if he was just like me in some way, that could just, give him some motivation.
Absolutely, I think it's really important. Also important to realize that Dr. King had doubts about himself. He didn't know if he was doing the right thing all the time. And he was criticized a lot in the newspapers. They said, when he began talking about war, when he said that the Vietnam War was wrong, the newspaper said, this is a mistake. Dr. King, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not an expert on war. You're an expert on the South, integration and segregation and voting rights. Stick to what you know. And it hurt his feelings when he read that in the newspaper. And you could hear him talking about it. You know, the government was tapping his phones, they were listening to his conversations, which is wrong, but as a result of that, we can hear what he said in his private moments, and you can hear how upset he was. Why are people criticizing me? All I'm trying to do is help. All I'm trying to do is live up to the words in the Bible. I'm trying to do what Jesus teaches us to do. And they're criticizing me for it, and his feelings were really hurt. So it's okay to understand that even Martin Luther King Jr. had moments where he doubted himself. And that's okay, because we all do. So that's a great question. Thank you.
What inspired you to write this book about Martin Luther King?
Another really good question. Thank you. So I grew up, I was born in 1964. Dr. King was still alive. And by the time I got to school, you know, they were teaching us about I Have a Dream. And maybe, you know, like in high school, I heard about the letter from Birmingham jail, but I realized that we've kind of turned him into a two-dimensional figure. You know, we don't know much about his life. We don't know much about who he really was. And it had been 40 years since the last King biography. So a biography is different from other history books. Biography just tells you, focuses just on the life story of one person. And you get a lot of other people, you get a lot of history. You know, I teach about the civil rights movement in the book, but it's really focused on one person's life. And that's a nice way, I think, to understand history. It helps us understand it a little bit better when you just focus on one person's life story. But Dr. King needs new biographies at least every 5 or 10 years. Not every 40 years, that's just too long. The world has changed in 40 years. The civil rights movement was a long time ago now. We need to remind ourselves, we need to remind readers, we need to write books for younger audiences. So I felt like it was really important for somebody to do a new King biography. It had been too long since the last one. And because I had already written about Muhammad Ali, I knew a lot of the people who knew Martin Luther King. I had already spoken to Jesse Jackson and Andrew Young and Harry Belafonte and Dick Gregory, people who knew Dr. King very well. So while I was interviewing them about Muhammad Ali, I said, "Would you help me write a book about Dr. King too?" And that's what got me started. So, as I said, it was a little scary to take on such a big subject, but I felt like we need new books about Dr. King, and I think in a few years we're going to need another one after this, and maybe somebody in this room will write it. And if you decide to do it, call me and I'll help you.
Thank you for that. So, Mr. Eig, this is my second question to ask you. Do you think this book will be as popular as some of your other books?
I hope this will be my most popular book. I want all my books to sell lots of copies, but I think this is the most important book I've ever written. And I think that the whole country and the whole world needs to listen to Dr. King's words again and think about his life, think about what it means to us today. Because though he died in 1968, he still has a lot to teach us. And that's why his words are all over your school. And you're leaving this school with his words in your head. And they're going to be stuck there. And you're going to repeat those lessons, I hope. And that's what this book is meant to do. It's meant to take King's words to more people who maybe all they know is I Have a Dream. And I hope that this book will sell lots and lots of copies so that, not just so that it becomes popular for me, I'd like to see it popular, but I'd like to see it popular so that Dr. King's story is better understood by a lot of people.
Thank you.
In your book, you stated, "Great men have not been boosters and buffoons, but perceivers of the terror of life, and have made themselves to face it." How do you think people implement this phrase in modern society?
Wow, that's a great question. I think what that quote means is that great men are not afraid to face the reality that it's hard what they're trying to do. Some great men, some famous men have been buffoons. Some of them, behave like fools and think only about themselves. But truly great men and women, like Dr. King, like Rosa Parks, like Septima Clark, like Ella Baker, they had the courage to recognize that it wasn't going to be easy. and that they might get hurt for trying to stand up and stand out and make a difference, and that the world might not like it, that they might suffer for challenging authority. But they're willing to take that chance anyway because they think it's so important. And in the case of Dr. King, he was willing to risk his life. He knew that he could die for what he was trying to do. He talked about it the very first time he spoke up. He was only 26 years old the first time he spoke up in front of a crowd and said, okay, I will lead the Montgomery bus boycott. He was only 26. And he knew that he was risking his life by doing that because people who spoke up and fought against segregation in the South, this is in Alabama, faced a very real risk. People were still being lynched in the South at that time. And he was willing to do it anyway. So I think what that quote means is that you recognize that what you're doing is worth sacrificing for. And King recognized that.
I would like to add on to that. Do you think this quote kind of represented like how the society looked at Dr. Martin Luther King and how he had to have faith in himself to continue doing what he's doing, no matter like what people said?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think you're absolutely right. I think what King realized is that if you believe in what you're doing, as he said, there's the time to do what's right is now, right? It's always the right time to do what is right. And even if other people tell you it's wrong, you've got to have the courage to stand up for yourself. And that's what he didn't just say that, you know, he lived it. You know, he walked the walk. And I say this over and over again. You know, look at what happened when his home was bombed. Dynamite was exploded on the porch while his baby was sleeping in the crib. And he could have stopped right there. He could have said, okay, well, I led for a year. Now I'm going to let someone else lead. And then just a year after that, he was in a store and someone came up to him and stabbed him in the chest. And he almost died. And he could have stopped after that. He could have said, well, I'm just going to become a teacher now. So that's what he originally wanted to do. He wanted to be a professor at a college. He could have said, okay, well, I've done this for 2 years now. I'm going to go teach, and someone else can do it from now on. But he didn't. He kept going, and every time he went further and further. He said, I'm going to go even further. I'm fighting for integration in the South. I'm going to start fighting for integration in the North. You know, he came to Chicago, and he said, why are Chicago schools so segregated? Why is Chicago housing so segregated? The problem isn't just in the South. And people said to him, Dr. King, stick with what you know best. You're from Georgia, you've been working in Alabama, stay there. You don't understand Chicago. Don't come up here and try to tell us what to do. But he came anyway, and he risked everything for that. So over and over again, to answer your question, he knew the risks, and he just kept going further and further, pushing harder and harder. He didn't back down. He didn't stay in his lane, as they were telling him to do. He went over the line. He went further and further. He doubled down on what he believed, and he was, I think he's maybe the bravest man I've ever heard.
Thank you.
Sure.
Why did you think it was important to include a white person's point of view during that time?
Well, let me say first of all, it's a good question. I'm a white guy writing about our nation's most important, most famous black man, right? I didn't think of it as writing this book from a white person's perspective. I wrote it as I'm an old journalist, and I think my job is to tell the story and stay out of the way. You won't find me in this book at all. It's not written in the first person. But of course, some of my influences in there. Everybody would write the book differently. If you were writing the book, it would be from your perspective and from what you know as a person and the way you were raised. So all of us bring our own biases to anything we write. But I tried to be as objective as possible and to tell this story and to learn from other people who had different backgrounds than my own. So I don't think this book represents a white person's version exclusively of the King story. I think it represents my best attempt to tell the story and to learn from other people who have different experiences than my own to create the best, most well-rounded portrait of King that I could write. But as I said, I hope that maybe someone in this room will write the next King biography and will add what they have learned and what they can bring to the story. I just tried to write the best book I could.
What was going through your head as you was writing the book?
Well, it changed over time. You know, in the beginning, as I said earlier, I was nervous, could I pull this off? It's a hard thing to try to write about someone else's life and to write about somebody as big as King. And then it began to be fun, in a way, because I traveled all around the country before COVID, interviewing people who knew Dr. King. And I thought, what a great opportunity that I get to meet King's barber. I get to meet the woman who played the organ in his church. I got to meet one of his friends from childhood. I got to meet people like Harry Belafonte, who knew King, who marched with King. And I was just having so much fun meeting these people and asking them, what was he like? Think about that. Again, like we think of King as being this figure from ancient history, but I could say to him, what would you, to his friends, what was it like just to hang out with him? What did he do when he wasn't working? What kind of music did he like to listen to? What did he like to eat? And I was learning so much about this person, and getting to know his friends and family was just an incredibly fun experience. And then I had to start thinking about writing the book, and that was hard too. There's a lot of pressure involved, so my feelings changed along the way. And as I said earlier, my feelings about Dr. King changed too. I became really, really more impressed with his courage. And then as you're writing the book and you start to see him becoming frustrated and struggling with some of the challenges in his life, I got sad. I was sad when I had to write about him dying. He was only 38 years old when he died. It was very sad for me to have to write about that too.
You said it took you 6 years to write this book, so I want to know how you kept yourself motivated and you didn't give up at some point.
That's a good question. When you write a book, you don't have an editor, you don't have a boss telling you what to do. I had 6 years to turn this in, and nobody breathing down my neck. I used to work for a newspaper, and your editor would go up to you and tap you on the shoulder and say, "Where's your story? It's due an hour ago." And now it's just up to me. And I think what keeps me focused is the fear of failing. I'm afraid that I might not be able to finish the book. I'm afraid that I might write a bad book, or that you guys are going to read it and say, it was kind of boring, or it was too long, or I don't know, the writing is not that great. So I work really hard every day for 6 years, and I don't do anything else. I don't teach, I don't write magazine stories. I just worked on this every day for 6 years. This and taking care of my family. That's pretty much it. And I think I put that pressure on myself, that I just really want to do a good job. And I also feel like I have this man's life in my hands. It's a little bit like being a doctor, right? If I do a bad job, I'm doing a real disservice. I have a huge responsibility to this man and to the people who trust me, who want to read this book, that I have to work really hard and get it done and do it right.
How much of an impact do you think Dr. Martin Luther King protests made on the societal views of Black people?
Wow, that's a big question. I think he's the most influential revolutionary figure in America since the American Revolution, right? And I think he deserves to be considered as one of the founding fathers of America. Because what did the founding fathers do? They created this vision of democracy for America, right? They created all men are created equal. They gave us the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But the Constitution and the Bill of Rights had a huge problem. They only applied to white people. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights said that all of us are free and equal, but the enslaved people don't count. We're not talking about that. And Dr. King changed it. I think the entire civil rights movement changed that. There were a lot of people marching with him. He doesn't deserve all the credit. But he was at the lead. And I think that he, more than anyone else, deserves to be considered as a founding father because he said those documents that are flawed, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, those are flawed, and we can fix them. We can change them so that they do apply to all people. And people in the South were denied access to the vote, they were denied access to restaurants, they were denied access to public transportation. There was this two-tiered system of democracy, two-tiered system of American life, and Dr. King and the civil rights activists who joined him said, that's got to stop. So I think his impact in that way ranks him as one of the founding fathers of America. He should be on Mount Rushmore. And unfortunately, we've lost some ground since the 60s. We still have segregated schools. We still have places in America that are trying to keep black people from voting. And that means we have some more work to do. That doesn't mean King failed. It just means that he got us part of the way, and we have to keep going to make more progress.
What do you think we could do as students in Chicago public schools to help push the movement further?
Your principal was telling me earlier that you guys march twice a year, and that you use those marches to call attention to the issues that you think are important, and I think that's fantastic. And I think we all have a responsibility. 58-year-old people like me, and teenagers like you, we all have the responsibility to carry forward the lessons that are so beautifully written on your walls here, and the words that are in this book, the things that Dr. King taught us, that it's up to each of us to not accept or refuse to accept what we see is wrong in society. We have to stand up for what we believe in. We have to keep working on it. So I think it's fantastic that you guys belong to a school that is called an Academy for Social Justice, because social justice is not just something that we get by putting the name on a school building. It's something we all have to fight for over and over and over again. It never stops. The fight never stops. So I hope that, I'm so glad that the school is teaching you those values. And I hope that all schools teach those values, even the ones that are not named after Dr. King.
All right, thank you.
Now I get to ask you a question. So I've heard many biographers say that when they write a biography of someone, it changes them. How did this book change you?
Wow. Every book I've written, I have dreams about them. This is not a Martin Luther King, I have dream reference. I have dreams about the people I'm writing about. And the dreams often reveal to me what it is that's haunting me. And Dr. King was always bothering me in my dreams. I wasn't doing enough. And I think that's the thing that it taught me, is that we tend to be selfish. We tend to think of ourselves first. And I write a book and I think, I hope it's a bestseller. And I hope that, I make enough money that I can send my kids to college. That's not what it's about, I think what Dr. King was haunting me with in those dreams is that we all need to think of ourselves as part of this beloved community that he talked about, and that we're all in it together. And if I'm writing a book about Dr. King, it needs to be about extending that community, that inviting people to be a part of that community, to think about how we all can work together to make the world a better place and be a little less selfish. I think that's something, especially these days when we're all on our phones and tweeting about ourselves and posting the best pictures that we can of ourselves on Instagram. Try to stop thinking of yourself and try to start thinking about where you fit in the world and how much bigger the world is, what kind of responsibility you have. I think that's I know it's getting philosophical, but that's how it feels. I just feel like he's calling me on me to be a better person.
That's powerful. My last question for you is, what do your kids think about this book?
Well, they haven't read it yet. They haven't really read any of my books. Well, my 19-year-old is starting to read some of my books. The 13-year-old just started reading my Jackie Robinson book. She's about halfway through it now. So I look forward to the day they read this one. And I look forward to the day you guys read it, and I'll be donating some copies to the school library. So when you read it, tell me what you think. Send me an email, call me. I'm easy to find. But I hope that my kids, first of all, see how much I love what I do. I love reading and writing, and that I love researching other people's lives and seeing what I can learn from them. And I don't care if they read my book so much as I hope they see that I have a real passion for what I do, and that I hope they find passion for whatever they do in life too.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I would like to acknowledge our student hosts who developed their own questions for Mr. Eig, sitting right up here on the stage. They have done a phenomenal job with the interview portion. Can we give them a power clap? Can we do that? I said, can we do that? All right, 1, 2, 3. So again, I want to acknowledge Ayana Shields. Please wave your hand. Matwan Davis, Zanaya Thomas, wave your hand, and Matthew Cotton. They are going to lead us in the next portion of this discussion. They have some questions that they have received from our students who have read portions of the book, and so they're going to read those questions. If your name is called and your question is chosen, please stand up or wave your hand so that we can acknowledge you and your question. I guess let's start with Matthew.
Mr. I, this question is from Zanaya. Stand up or wave your hand. When did you first become interested in MLK?
Well, as I said, I certainly learned about him in school when I was in elementary school. But I think I became interested in writing the book about Dr. King when I was interviewing people for my Muhammad Ali book, and I realized that they knew him, that they knew King, and that just kind of rattled me. Wow, there's still people around who knew Dr. King, and that made me want to run out and see how many of them I could talk to. So I think that was really the turning point for me.
This question is from Josiah. She said, how do we know what we read is real?
Are you here? Hi. That is such a good question. How do you know I didn't make stuff up in this book? First of all, I tape all my interviews, and those interviews will be available for people to listen to themselves someday. I will give them to a library. But also, in the back of my book, I've got like 100 note pages of notes that tell you where I got it. So if I have a quote in here where I have Dr. King saying, I have a dream, right? You can go in the back and say where he said it, when he said it, how I know he said it. So I'm trying to prove to the reader that I didn't make anything up. But you never know. You have to read it and also judge for yourself. Does this sound legit? Does it sound like you can trust this person? And one way that you can do that is look for writers who admit when they don't know something. You guys have all heard about the I Have a Dream speech. Have you ever heard about why Dr. King gave that portion of the speech, why he talked about his dream? Because he wrote the speech and did not include I Have a Dream. And then about halfway through it, he was given his speech, and he stopped, and he looked up, and he said, and I have a dream today, and it was not in the script that he'd written. And then he gave the most famous part of the speech, I have a dream. But we don't know whether he had a plan to do that all along. Some people think Mahalia Jackson, the great gospel singer, yelled to him, tell about the dream, Martin. And then he said, okay, I'll tell because she'd heard him give the I Have a Dream speech before. We don't know exactly why he decided that day to change his script. And I tell you in the book that we don't know whether it was Mahalia who encouraged him or whether he had the idea on his own. So it's very important when you're reading a book to judge for yourself. Do you think you can trust this writer? And one way you can tell if there's a writer who can be trusted is when he admits what he doesn't know. So that's one way of answering that. But I think you have to become a smart reader and develop a sense, like when one of your friends is telling you a story and you can tell they're exaggerating it, right? Or they're making stuff up. You get a sense for that. You develop kind of a radar for it. So do the same thing when you read a book. When you're reading a book that's about a teenager, someone your age, does it feel like the author really knows what it's like to be a teenager, right? Be critical. Be a critical reader. And if you find a writer that you don't think you can trust, stop reading the book. Put it down and go find a better one.
On page 330, it says, the protest had horses and dogs. Why is that? And who is that from?
Oh, who asked the question? Oh, there's no name on that one. Does anybody want to raise their hand if they asked that question? Why do you guys think the police would bring out horses and dogs at a peaceful protest led by Martin Luther King Jr.? I mean, does anybody have any thoughts on that? Why do you think they might?
I think they might did it so they could maybe scare the protesters and kind of rally them up so it can look like, because I'm pretty sure most of it was like recorded live, so it can look like they did like something violent or it was becoming like unruly.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. The police were trying to intimidate the protesters, and you see the same thing today, right? We had peaceful marches through Chicago after George Floyd was murdered, and the police were there in their, full battle gear and, armored vehicles, right? It's sad, but they are trying to send a message about who's in charge, and I think that's what the dogs and the horses did.
This question is from Mr. Mimi's class, and the question is, why didn't people look at Dr. King for the things he did outside of his speeches?
So you're saying, this is a question about why people looked at his flaws, why they were interested in his personal life?
I think the question means that outside of his speeches, which I think he's the most famous for, and his marches, why didn't they look at him for other things? Because you said he ventured into the north and they told him to go back to the south, stick to the things he knows. Why did people look at him for more information?
Oh, okay, that's a good question too. It's very easy to focus just on the famous moments in Dr. King's career. Selma, Montgomery, Birmingham, and to not focus so much on the places where the results weren't as clear, like Chicago, like Los Angeles. He did not win a clear victory in those places. So we focus on the easy stories, the victories that are really clear. But I think it's important to remember that he tried in Chicago, and Chicago rejected his attempts to bring change here. So I think it's important to talk about the places where even King's work did not necessarily result in clear victories.
Rashawn said on page 330, it says that no women had been offered speaking roles despite pressure from Dorothy Hay, and why not?
Yeah, and this is another one of King's flaws. He was not perfect. And he was raised at a time when women were expected to be housewives for the most part. Especially in the church, women did not have lead roles of leadership when King was growing up. And as a result of that, he overlooked the contributions that women could make to the civil rights movement. And it wasn't just Dr. King, it was a lot of the leaders of the civil rights movement. They were almost all men. And there were very few women at positions of leadership, and no women were given main speaking positions at the March on Washington. And that wasn't just Dr. King's choice, that was all of the leaders of the March on Washington decided that the only speakers should be men. So I think we've learned a lot since then, and I think that would not happen again today, but it's a sign of the times, and it's a sign of their own prejudices. I mean, even though Dr. King was one of our greatest champions in fighting prejudice, he had prejudices of his own. We all do. We all have blind spots, and that was one of his blind spots.
Thank you so much. And Rashawn, you want to wave your hand or stand up? Thank you very much for that question.
That was a great question.
We have time for 1 to 2 questions from any staff members who would like to ask Mr. Eig anything. If any staff members are interested, please wave your hand or make your way to the stage, make your way to the front, and we can ask your question. I think my staff is a bit shy, but I do see 2 people, Mr. Guillory and Ms. Walker. They are making their way to the front. Both Mr. Guillory and Ms. Walker are very passionate about social justice, and so I'm really excited to hear your questions.
Hello. So thank you for your book. Thank you for your words today. This question actually doesn't come from me. This comes from Ebony G. If you could just wave your hand a little bit. She's shaking her head, but she's very humble. But she asked, what is your favorite book that you've written?
This one. A, because it's the most recent, and I'm smarter now than I was when I wrote the earlier books. You know, I think I'm getting better as I go along. I think we all should get better at the things we care about as we get older and practice more. But I also think, as I said earlier, I think it's my most important book because King's words in his life still have the power to move us today. We need him as much as we ever did, and I'm really hopeful that this book will help, you know, people think about him again in provocative ways. So I feel like this is my favorite book. I love all of them, just like, you know, I love all my kids. Can't choose.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for spending your time with our kids this morning. I'm just curious, as we continue to improve in writing in our classrooms, how we can allow our children to still have pride in our heroes while also being able to write about them as whole human beings. Any advice that you would have for them to be able to see a holistic view of those that they may admire and want to write about?
I think that's a great question, and you know, we have this tendency to write about the same people over and over. Look for heroes that other people haven't written about. Think about people you know in your community who are heroes, and then ask them the questions. You know, that's what made this book so exciting to me, is that I could still go out and find people who knew Dr. King and ask them, you know, what was he like when he was in a bad mood? How did he feel when he got up? When he got hungry, you know, what was it like to sit in the room with him and listen to music, you know, but also ask him, why did he feel this? Why was he so moved to do this? And you can ask anybody that question. So it's about trying to relate to our heroes. Think about what it must have been like for them. And think about this for every movie you've ever seen with a hero in it, right? There's a moment in their lives where they have to decide whether they're going to step up and take that challenge, right? Look at Star Wars, look at, you know, Black Panther, right? There's a moment in everybody's life where, and in every movie you watch about a hero, where they have to act. So ask yourself that question about anybody you're writing about. You're writing about a paper for school about Dr. King, or you're writing about Rosa Parks, or you're writing about your grandmother, and there was a difficult moment in their life when they had a choice to make. Do I risk it or don't I? Think about that moment and what really made it happen. Because remember, it could have gone either way. When your parents met and fell in love, they could have stepped back and said, no, I'm not going to propose to this person. I'm not going to ask this person out, right? Ask yourself, what happened at that moment when they made that choice? That's like one of my key things. And I think in every book, I ask myself that question, like, what made this person become that person? And I think we can apply that lesson to anybody we write about. And it's a key thing. So that's probably where I'd start.
Everyone, I want to thank you so very much for your engagement. Students, I thank you for your time, your engagement during this discussion. And I ask that you join me in giving our student hosts and our guest author a round of applause. I love people who do classes on this side. It's absolutely wonderful. So Mr. Eig so generously brought a few copies of his books that he will be signing and donating to King Academy, but he's also going to donate some copies of King of Life once it is released. And so we're super excited about that. You all will get to read that in academic seminar, and it's going to be a joy. Student hosts, do you all have anything else that you want to say before we close out?
I just want to say that I think it's cool that you found something that you're like passionate about at like such a young age, to the point where you can like swiftly like make your choices to like write the book and like do other things that you're passionate about. When you said it took you 6 years to write this book and you wasn't doing nothing else, was there time that you felt that you wanted to give up or write this book?
No, I never wanted to give up. I didn't want to stop. In fact, if I could keep writing it for another 6 years, I would, but I needed to get it done, to get it in print, and also to get paid. So you have to finish it if you want to get paid. That's the way it works. So, but I had so much fun, I would have kept going.
You're a pretty good writer. I was learning some new words, reading some of that book. So yeah, thank you.
That means a lot to me. Thank you. I try not to use big words. You know, one of the things that I learned from being a newspaper reporter is don't use big words. Oh, I have a trivia question for you guys, and I brought a postcard, a picture of Dr. King, and it's autographed, not by Dr. King, it's autographed by me in the back. If anybody knows the answer to this question, Martin Luther King Jr. was not his original name when he was born. Does anybody know? Oh my gosh, there's too many hands. All right, well, the first hand I saw. There. What was his real name when he was born? You got it, right there. Yes, this guy in the second row. You get the postcard.
All right, congratulations. Congratulations.
It was Michael King. Very good.
Awesome. Well, Mr. I, you have anything else to close us
No, I
out
just
with?
want to say this is my first time talking about the book because the book doesn't even come out till May. I was nervous, but you were a fantastic audience and you asked such good questions, and I will come back anytime you want me, so thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.